Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. It was a typical Tuesday evening when I first felt the stirrings of doubt. Mark had always spoken about his boss, Claire, with a mix of admiration and frustration. "She's demanding, always pushing me to do more," he'd say, and I'd nod, sympathetic to his long hours and high expectations. But that evening, as I sat on the couch, waiting for him to come home, something felt off. I was scrolling through my phone when I saw the familiar sound of a text notification. I glanced up at the clock. It was past 8 p.m. He was still at work, or so he said. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away, but it lingered, gnawing at me. When his phone buzzed again, I caught a glimpse of the screen. The name that flashed wasn't one I'd seen before, Claire. Why was he smiling so softly at her name? I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something didn't sit right, and I knew this was only the beginning. Mark's late nights had become the norm. It was his job, he explained, that demanded his time. But it wasn't just the long hours anymore. It was the small details. The faint trace of perfume in the air when he came home. The one I didn't wear. It clung to his shirt, lingering in the fabric like a memory I couldn't escape. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone at the office had worn it, and he'd been too busy to notice. But then came the days when the scent was stronger. It didn't add up. Late nights, long meetings, a fragrance I didn't recognize. I began to wonder how many lies I had been told. I thought I had imagined it, the way Mark had smiled at his phone earlier that week. But then, one night, while I was in bed, I heard the familiar buzz. His phone lit up, and for a split second, I saw it. A message from Claire. "Can't wait to see you again." My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to dismiss it, tell myself it was nothing, but the words wouldn't leave my mind. Who said that to their boss? Why did it sound so intimate, so personal? I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I wasn't imagining things anymore. There was something happening between them, something I couldn't ignore. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being deceived. I needed answers. So, when Mark stepped into the shower that evening, I took the opportunity to grab his phone. My heart pounded as I unlocked it. His password was the same as always. Scrolling through their messages, my stomach dropped. Inside jokes, late-night texts, even photos of places they had visited together. Love notes hidden behind the guise of work. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Everything I had believed about my marriage, every promise Mark had made, now seemed like a lie. This wasn't just work. This was betrayal. When I confronted Mark that night, he was adamant. "It's just work," he insisted, his voice full of defensive panic. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, that I couldn't ignore. He avoided my gaze, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to reach for his phone. He tried to laugh it off, but his laughter sounded hollow, forced. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to ignore the doubt that gnawed at me, but the evidence was too clear. His denial was too obvious, and it was becoming harder and harder to pretend I didn't know what was going on. I had a choice. I could stay quiet and live with the doubt, or I could confront the truth and face whatever came next. "I'm going on a business trip," Mark told me one morning, a casual remark. He didn't mention where, or why, or when he would return. He was vague, brushing off my questions as if it was no big deal. It wasn't like him to be so distant, so unwilling to share details. When I later found the itinerary for the trip, I saw something that made my heart drop. Claire's name. She was going too. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a business trip anymore. It was a trip they were both on. Alone. Together. The doubt that had been festering inside me now felt like a roaring wave, crashing against my chest. How could he do this to me? I had to know for sure. I couldn't just sit back and wait for more lies. So, I began my investigation. I went through his emails, checked his calendar, and made a note of every detail. His phone was my new obsession. I started looking at the times he received texts, the little moments when his expression would change, as if he were caught off guard by something. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone willing to invade the privacy of the person I loved just to get the truth. It didn't feel right, but neither did the situation I was living in. I had to know everything, even if it meant destroying the little piece I had left. One evening, while scrolling through social media to pass the time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Claire had posted a picture of herself at a restaurant, laughing with friends. But in the background, partially hidden by her shoulder, I saw it. Mark's watch. The one he always wore. I zoomed in, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew that watch. He wore it every day, without fail. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was confirmation, even if she hadn't said anything directly. The pieces were starting to come together, and none of them were pointing in a direction I wanted to go. It was a slip of paper that shouldn't have mattered, but it did. I found the receipt buried in Mark's jacket pocket. A hotel, 2 guests, 1 bed. I didn't need to read the rest of the details to understand what that meant. I didn't want to understand, but the truth was there, staring me in the face. I held the receipt in my hand, staring at it as if it would suddenly change, would become something less damning. But it didn't. It was a record of their lies, and I was holding it in my hands. My world was shattering around me, piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I couldn't let him see the pain in my eyes. I couldn't let him know that I knew. So, I played the part of the perfect wife, smiling when he came home late, kissing him goodbye in the morning, pretending everything was fine. I wore my mask, hiding the storm inside. I wanted him to feel comfortable, to think he had won, that I was still in the dark. But with every kiss, with every touch, I felt my heart breaking a little more. I couldn't keep pretending forever. I needed answers, but I had to bide my time. I would wait, and when the moment was right, I would make him face the truth. That night, while we were having dinner, his phone buzzed on the counter. He reached for it, glancing at the screen before stepping outside. I tried to focus on my food, but curiosity gnawed at me. I pretended not to notice the call from boss. I hadn't realized how much I had been dreading hearing her name until that moment. As he stepped out, I tried to listen for any clue in his voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Soft, almost affectionate. When he came back inside, his face was flushed, his expression tight. "Work stuff," he muttered, but it sounded forced, like he was trying to convince both of us. I didn't believe him. He was hiding something, and the call only confirmed it. I wasn't imagining things anymore. His loyalty had crumbled. I met Sarah for coffee the next day, desperate for some distraction. As we sat and talked about life, she casually mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine. "I saw Mark last night," she said, sipping her drink. "He was with Claire at that new restaurant. They were so close, you wouldn't believe it." She was laughing, touching his arm like they were more than just co-workers. My stomach twisted. It was everything I had feared, but hearing it from someone else made it all the more real. I tried to act normal, to keep my voice steady, but inside, a storm was brewing. My best friend had seen it with her own eyes. The proof I needed was right in front of me, and it hurt more than I had anticipated. It was time. I had watched and waited long enough, but now I had to do something. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to cry or scream. I was going to expose him. Slowly, methodically, I would unravel the web of lies. I started with the basics, gathering proof, documenting everything. I couldn't trust my emotions to guide me anymore. I needed facts. I had the receipts, the texts, the social media posts. Now, it was about timing. I'd wait for the perfect moment to confront him. No more pretending. He'd never see it coming. I wasn't going to beg for the truth. I would force it out of him. He had betrayed me, and it was time for him to pay the price. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I had to test his loyalty. So, I came up with a plan, a simple one. I asked him to cancel a work dinner he had planned for the next evening. He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "I really can't. It's important," he replied, his voice tight. My heart sank. It wasn't about the dinner. It was about what it represented. He was willing to choose work over me, even when I asked for something as simple as his time. The refusal stung, and I realized it wasn't just Claire he was loyal to. It was his career, his image, his lies. My doubts grew into certainty. The man I married was no longer the person I knew. I decided to pay him a visit at work, unannounced. The idea of catching him off guard made my heart race. I knew I wasn't just looking for proof. I was looking for his reaction. When I stepped into his office, the tension was palpable. Mark looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. Claire was sitting across from him, her face draining of color as she recognized me. It was clear neither of them had expected me to show up. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mark scrambled to find words, but his flustered expression gave him away. He wasn't as innocent as he'd claimed. The guilt was written all over his face, and for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt powerful. Claire was the first to break the silence, fumbling for an explanation. "We were just going over some reports," she said, her voice too high-pitched. She avoided my gaze, her hands shaking slightly as she straightened a pile of papers. I could see through the excuse, and I knew she was trying to cover up something more. Mark didn't say anything, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and frustration. I wasn't sure if I felt worse for him or for her. She clearly didn't want to face the truth, and neither did he. But I wasn't going to let it go. Not anymore. This was the moment I had been waiting for. It was time to stop pretending, for all of us. Mark's reaction was nothing short of pathetic. He stammered, his words tripping over each other. "It's not what you think," he finally managed to say, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He was sweating, his hands twitching at his sides like he wanted to flee. It was almost pitiful to watch. This man who had claimed to love me, who had sworn loyalty, now reduced to a stammering mess. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but I stayed calm, forcing myself to breathe. This was it. I didn't need his words. His guilty body language spoke louder than any denial could. He wasn't just my husband anymore. He was a stranger. I couldn't play dumb anymore. The lies were too much, the evidence undeniable. My heart, once full of love for Mark, now felt like a hollow shell. Every sweet memory, every promise we'd made, felt like a cruel joke. I wanted to scream, to confront him in anger, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I turned to him, my voice low and steady. "I know what's been going on," I said. "I know about you and Claire." The words felt like knives in my chest, but I forced them out. Mark's face went pale, and I watched as the realization hit him. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. The truth was out, and so was my broken heart. I couldn't stop now, not when I was this close. I hired a private investigator, someone who would dig deeper, find the truth I couldn't reach on my own. He had connections, access to things I couldn't get. A week later, I received a report, complete with photos. Mark and Claire together, holding hands, smiling as if nothing mattered. It was worse than I had imagined. They had been seeing each other for much longer than I'd realized. I felt sick, but also strangely relieved. The truth was finally in front of me, undeniable. There was no more room for doubt, no more pretending. Mark had betrayed me in ways I hadn't even known, and now I had everything I needed to make him pay. The photos were damning. Mark and Claire, kissing in his car. A look of tenderness between them that made my stomach churn. I didn't need to see more. The images confirmed everything I'd suspected. They weren't just co-workers, they weren't just friends. They were lovers. The betrayal was written in every frame, every stolen moment captured on film. I stared at the pictures for what felt like hours, my hands shaking. I could hear Mark in the other room, unaware that his secrets were laid out before me. There was no excuse, no justification. The man I had trusted was a stranger, and the woman I had once called an acquaintance was nothing but a liar. That morning, Mark told me he loved me. He always did, right before he left for work. But today, it didn't sound the same. His words felt hollow, empty, like a scripted line he said out of habit. He kissed me, but it didn't hold the same warmth it once did. I stood there, frozen, trying to hold it together. How could he still say those words after everything? How could he look me in the eye and pretend nothing was wrong? He didn't know I had the proof. He didn't know I'd seen the photos, read the messages, but I felt it. The pain was suffocating, and no amount of his "I love you" could ever make it go away. The betrayal had hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. And now, I was ready to confront him. The time for pretending was over. I wasn't the only one being lied to. As I sat in the car, processing everything, a thought suddenly struck me. Claire's husband, did he know? Was he also living a lie, like I had been? It wasn't until later that day that I found out. I ran into him at the store, looking disheveled, like he hadn't slept in days. When I asked how he was doing, he looked at me, eyes wide with exhaustion. "You know about them, don't you?" he whispered. I nodded. "I found out last week," he continued, voice shaking. "She's been seeing him for months, and I don't know what to do anymore." His words were like a punch in the gut. Claire had betrayed not just me, but him as well. We shared a silent understanding. We were both victims in their twisted game. I reached out to Claire's husband, Mark's co-conspirator in this affair. We met in a small cafe, the weight of our shared pain hanging in the air. We exchanged stories, comparing notes about what we had seen, heard, and felt. He showed me his phone, filled with the same messages I had discovered. Photos of Claire and Mark, too many to count. "I don't even know who she is anymore," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I thought we had something real, but this?" His voice trailed off. I felt for him, but there was something else in my chest. Relief. I wasn't alone in this. We were both victims of their betrayal, and together, we had the power to expose them. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for both of us. I wasn't ready to confront Mark head-on just yet. I needed a plan, something that would expose him for good. So, I set the perfect trap. I fabricated a fake emergency, one that would get him out of the office and into my web. I texted him, acting as though something had happened with a friend, and he needed to come home. His response was immediate. He left the office early, as I knew he would. But the real test was whether he'd choose me or Claire. As I waited, I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. This would be the moment that would prove everything. He was walking straight into my trap, and this time, I wouldn't let him escape. When Mark walked through the door, I could see the guilt written all over his face. But what shocked me more was what happened next. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. Without thinking, he reached for it, looking at the screen before stuffing it back into his pocket. The message had been brief, but the look on his face said everything. "We'll talk later," he muttered, as if I wouldn't notice. His actions spoke louder than any words could. He had chosen her. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I was standing there, the woman he had sworn to love, and he couldn't even look me in the eye. My heart shattered all over again, but now I was done. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a betrayal of everything we had built together. I had waited long enough. I wasn't going to be passive anymore, pretending I didn't know what was happening. I walked into the living room, where Mark was trying to distract himself with the TV, pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk." He looked up, his face paling when he saw the expression in my eyes. I didn't waste time. I slid the photos across the table, the ones of him and Claire, the intimate ones, the ones that proved it all. His face turned crimson, his hands trembling as he tried to form words. But nothing could save him now. The truth was out, and there was no denying it. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold. "How long have you been lying to me?" Mark's response was nothing short of pathetic. He tried to explain, to justify his actions, but I couldn't listen. "It was just stress," he said, his voice cracking. "You know how demanding work is." I didn't mean for things to go this far. I didn't even flinch at his words. It wasn't stress. It was selfishness. It was betrayal. He looked at me, eyes pleading, like I should feel sorry for him. But I didn't. I didn't feel sympathy for the man who had torn my heart to shreds. "You can't fix this, Mark," I said, my voice breaking. "It's over." He begged. He apologized. But I wasn't listening anymore. The man I thought I knew was gone. And now, so was my trust. When I confronted Claire, I expected her to be defensive, but not like this. She acted like I was the problem, like I was the one who had ruined everything. "You don't understand," she said, her voice sharp. "You were holding him back. He's ambitious. He needed someone who understood that." Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't let her see how much they hurt. She was just as guilty as Mark, maybe even more so. She had stolen my husband, and now she was trying to justify it. "You don't get to blame me," I snapped. "You had a choice, just like he did." She glared at me, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. This wasn't about ambition. It was about betrayal. I had had enough. I wasn't going to play his game anymore, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I stood up, looking Mark in the eye, my voice steady but firm. It's over, Mark. I'm done. The words felt like a weight lifted off my chest. For so long, I had been clinging to the idea of the man I thought he was, but now I was letting it go. I wasn't going to keep trying to fix something that was beyond repair. His face fell, and I saw the desperation in his eyes, but I didn't care. The tears he had shed before didn't matter anymore. The promises he had made meant nothing now. The only thing that mattered was moving on. The next morning, Mark came to me, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Please, don't leave me, he begged, his voice hoarse. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. Please, I'm begging you. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. I had heard it all before, the same empty apologies, the same promises he couldn't keep. You had every chance to make it right, I said coldly, but you chose her. And now, there's nothing left between us. I wasn't going to forgive him. I wasn't going to forget what he had done. His desperation only made me feel more certain that I was doing the right thing. There was no going back. Our marriage was over. The fallout from Mark's affair was inevitable. Words spread like wildfire. Everyone at his office knew. Whispers followed him down the halls, and eyes lingered on him when he walked in. He became a walking scandal, his credibility shattered. His coworkers who had once looked up to him now avoided eye contact. The tension was palpable. No matter how many times he tried to apologize or explain himself, it didn't matter. His reputation was ruined. He was no longer the successful, admired man he had once been. I watched from the sidelines, indifferent to his shame. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him. He had lost everything, and in a way, he deserved it. The life he had built on lies had crumbled, and now, the truth was his only companion. Claire's career was now on the line. She had made a reckless choice, and now, it was catching up with her. Rumors about the affair started circulating within her office, too. Her colleagues, once friendly and respectful, now avoided her. Her professional reputation, once impeccable, had become tainted. I knew that the consequences for her would be harsh. Dating a married man, especially one whose wife found out, was a risky move. Her career, her position in the company, everything she had worked for, was now in jeopardy. It wasn't long before she submitted her resignation. She couldn't afford to stay, not with the gossip surrounding her. Her escape wasn't graceful, but it was the only option left. She had caused her own downfall, and now, she had to live with it. Mark spent the days after our breakup in a daze, replaying his actions over and over. He was a shell of the man I had once loved, and every time I saw him, I could sense his regret. His messages became increasingly desperate. I'm sorry, he texted. I can't stop thinking about you. It was too little, too late. He had everything, a wife who loved him, a career that admired him, and he threw it all away for a fleeting affair. The guilt was consuming him, but I wasn't about to forgive him. I had suffered long enough. I didn't need his remorse. It wasn't going to fix what he had broken. He had a lifetime to regret his actions, but I had moved on. My heart had closed off to him, and nothing he said could reopen it. The idea of moving on was both freeing and terrifying. How could I trust again after everything Mark had done? But I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The first step was letting go of him, of the life we had built together. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I still found myself looking at our wedding photos, wondering where it all went wrong. But deep down, I knew that I deserved better. I deserved someone who wouldn't betray me, someone who would cherish me the way I deserved. Moving on meant learning to trust myself again. It meant embracing the future, even if it felt uncertain. It was time to focus on me. And slowly, I began to rebuild. A week after Mark and I parted ways, I received a message from Claire's husband. He had reached out, and for the first time, I felt a small sense of solidarity. She's begging me to forgive her, he wrote, but I can't. I just can't. His words resonated with me in a way I hadn't expected. He was in the same position I had been in, struggling with the decision to forgive or walk away. I couldn't tell him what to do, but I understood his pain. I know how you feel, I replied. It's not easy, But you have to do what's best for you. I didn't wish him any ill will. We were both victims of their betrayal, and though our paths had been shattered, perhaps we would both find a way to heal. He wasn't alone anymore. Mark's sudden apology came as a surprise. He called me late one evening, his voice trembling. I made the biggest mistake of my life, he confessed. I never should have done it. I ruined everything. Please, can we just talk? I listened to him, his words tumbling over each other, but none of it reached me. His apology was just another empty gesture, another attempt to fix what was beyond repair. Mark, I said, my voice steady but firm, there's nothing left to say. You made your choice, and I made mine. I hung up the phone, not feeling relief or closure, but a quiet resolve. I didn't need him to apologize to me anymore. I had already let go. His words were just noise in the background of my life. It was over. Mark never thought I would be serious about the divorce. He had always believed that I would forgive him, that he could smooth things over. But when the divorce papers arrived in the mail, his world came crashing down. He had always thought that I would stay, that I would wait for him to get it together, but I wasn't the same person anymore. The woman who had trusted him, who had believed in our future, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. When I handed him the papers, his face fell. It was the final blow, and this time, he couldn't fix it. I wasn't going to give him another chance. The end had come, and there was no turning back. Mark's last-ditch effort to win me back was pathetic. He sent me roses, a reminder of the romantic gestures he used to make when we were first together. He even planned a weekend getaway, hoping that the old memories would pull me back. But I wasn't fooled. The gestures felt hollow, empty. They weren't expressions of love. They were desperate attempts to cling to the past. I didn't need flowers or trips. I needed honesty, loyalty, respect. He had none of that to offer. It's not going to work, Mark, I told him when he showed up at my door. I don't want your roses. I want my life back. His face was pained, but I wasn't moved. I was done. There was no room for him in my life anymore. When I signed the divorce papers, it felt like a weight was lifted off my chest. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. I wasn't tied to a man who had betrayed me. I wasn't bound by the lies or the heartache. I was free. Free to rediscover myself, free to make choices that were my own, and free to let go of everything that had weighed me down. The future no longer seemed like a burden. It felt like an open road, full of possibilities. I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I was stronger than I had ever been. I was ready for whatever came next. My freedom was something no one could take away from me. It was mine. Rumors about Claire's affair with Mark spread fast. She had resigned from her job, and soon, her life seemed to fall apart in a way that mirrored my own. I didn't take pleasure in her misfortune, but I couldn't help feeling vindicated. She had chosen to destroy my life, and now, it seemed like everything was crumbling around her. She couldn't outrun the consequences of her actions. One by one, the things she had once held dear, her career, her social standing, even her reputation, began to slip away. She had burned bridges, and now she was left alone to pick up the pieces. It wasn't the revenge I had sought, but it was a form of justice. She had to face the fallout of her choices, just as Mark did. Without Claire, Mark's world fell apart. He lost everything, the affair, the company that had once admired him, and the trust of everyone around him. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore. He became a shadow of the man I once knew, unable to escape the consequences of his actions. His friends stopped calling, his colleagues avoided him, and even his family began to distance themselves. The betrayal he had caused, both to me and to Claire's husband, had completely unraveled his life. He was left with nothing but his own regret. The money, the success, none of it mattered anymore. Mark was alone. He had sacrificed it all for an affair that had never been worth it. As I watched him fall from a distance, I felt no satisfaction. I wasn't looking for his destruction. I was looking for my own peace. And that's what I was starting to find. Months had passed since I signed the divorce papers, and one day, I saw Mark again. He was walking down the street, looking older than I remembered, haggard, with a heaviness in his steps. The man who had once been full of confidence and ambition now seemed defeated, as if life had taken everything from him. He didn't see me at first, but when our eyes met, I could see the brief flicker of recognition. His face softened for a moment, as if he was searching for the woman he had once loved. "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly, his voice full of regret. I looked at him, feeling nothing but a cold calm. "No," I replied, "I don't hate you. But I don't need you either." And with that, I turned and walked away. There was no need for closure. I had already moved on. Mark's question lingered in my mind for days. "Do you hate me?" His eyes had pleaded, searching for something. Perhaps forgiveness, perhaps some trace of the love we once had. But the truth was, I didn't hate him. Hate implied that I still cared. And I didn't. I had already let go of the man he used to be. I had learned to separate the man I had married from the one who betrayed me. It wasn't hate, it was indifference. It was peace. I didn't need his apology, his regret, or his presence. What I needed was to rebuild my own life, free of him, free of the lies, free of the pain. And I had done that. So, no, Mark, I didn't hate you, but I no longer cared for you either. A year had passed since the divorce, and I had never felt more alive. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, focusing on my passions and my own happiness. I had rediscovered who I was without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. I traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, spent time with friends who lifted me up, and pursued hobbies I had long forgotten. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And the best part? I had done it all on my own. I didn't need Mark, and I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was whole, and I was proud of the woman I had become. My new beginning was everything I had dreamed of, and more. It wasn't long before I found love again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the passionate, all-consuming love I had once shared with Mark. It was calm, steady, and real. He was kind, honest, and patient. Everything Mark had never been. He loved me for who I was, flaws and all, and I loved him in return. There was no drama, no lies, no deceit. Just two people who cared for each other deeply. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe in his arms. He didn't want to change me or control me. He simply wanted to be with me. It was the love I deserved, the kind I had always wanted but never knew how to find. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. One day, Claire reached out to me. She sent a message, simply saying, "I'm sorry." There was no explanation, no excuses, just a quiet admission of guilt. For a moment, I considered responding, but then I remembered how much she had hurt me. She had stolen my husband, destroyed my trust, and tried to justify her actions at every turn. Her apology didn't change the past. It didn't undo the betrayal. So, I left her on read. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about moving forward. I had spent too much time looking back, and I wasn't going to waste another second of my life on someone who didn't deserve my forgiveness. She had made her choices, just like I had made mine. And mine was to let go. A few months later, Mark sent me one last message. It was brief, "Goodbye. I wish things had turned out differently." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. I had moved on, and so had he, in his own way. We were both trying to find our own paths, even if they had taken different directions. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't sad either. The person I had once known was gone, and all that remained was the shadow of what he had been. I deleted the message, not because I was trying to forget, but because I had no need to keep holding on. It was time to fully let go. I had spent so much of my life looking back, replaying the mistakes, wondering where I had gone wrong. But now, I realized that the only way forward was to stop looking behind. The past was just that, the past. I couldn't change it, and I wouldn't let it define me. I had learned from it, yes, but I refused to live in it. I had a future to build, a life to create, and I wasn't going to waste another moment on things that no longer mattered. Mark, Claire, the affair. They were all behind me, and that's where they would stay. I was moving forward, and nothing could hold me back. The woman I had become wasn't the same woman who had stood in front of Mark, broken and betrayed. I was stronger, wiser, and more confident than I had ever been. I had survived one of the most painful experiences of my life, and instead of letting it break me, I had let it shape me. My story wasn't one of defeat. It was one of strength. I had taken control of my own life, and I was proud of who I had become. I had found my voice, and I wasn't afraid to speak up for myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and nothing could take that away from me. The best revenge wasn't in getting back at Mark or Claire. It wasn't in making them suffer for what they had done. The best revenge was living my life, fully and unapologetically. I found happiness, love, and peace without them. I wasn't defined by their actions or their betrayal. I was defined by my own strength, my own choices. Every day that I woke up, free from their lies and manipulation, was a victory. I didn't need revenge. I had something better, my freedom, and I was living it to the fullest.